Good morning. In this class, we will deal with the two concepts in research. One is positivism and another one is post-positivism. See, these two are philosophical foundations in research. Research has some philosophies which is used in any type of research, and these two are the basics. Now, when we move to positivism and post-positivism, why do we need this? There are certain factors which affect the research, and these factors that affect the research or which is used along with the research falls under the two categories. One is positivism and another is post-positivism. They influence how we conduct research, how we analyze data, and how we draw conclusions. See, these two options or these two philosophies, first one is positivism, another one is post-positivism. They help or they influence in the ways that one conducts research, one analyzes data, and one draws conclusion. They also reflect on the philosophies of research, on reality and knowledge, how one conducts a research and how brings out knowledge, or does this research based on reality and gives out knowledge. Now, what is positivism? How did it begin? When we look at the word positivism, which was formulated by Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte is a French philosopher. It was formulated in the early 19th century. Now, this philosopher proposed to the world, to the researchers, that human knowledge which is involved in research progress through three stages. The first stage is the theological stage. The three stages which, according to him, which helps in doing a research is a theological stage, metaphysical stage, and the positive stage. In the positive stage, knowledge is based on observation, experience, and empirical evidence. In the theological and metaphysical speculations or the stage, it is not based on the observation, it is not based on the experience. The positive stage, according to the French philosopher who coined this term, positivism, or who brought this into the field of research, he says every researcher progress through three stages, and the three stages are metaphysical stage, theological stage, and the positive stage. The first stage is the positive stage, where, according to him, the positive stage, it believes on the observation, experience, and the data that a researcher collects. The positivism, according to him, positivism has to use scientific methodologies to prove something, to accept a hypothesis or to reject it. So positivism, according to him, will use a scientific method, right? And it would not use any abstract reasoning. He suggested that the natural world operated according to the laws could be observed, tested, and verified through empirical research. According to him, any research that is being taken could be observed and then experienced with the empirical evidence, right? And this is what his takeaway or his say on positivism. The view would later be refined by this was later after Auguste Comte introduced this philosophy. We also had a few other scientists who followed this principle, like John Stuart Mill, Karl Popper. They all contributed to the development of positivism. So basically, this began in the 19th century. To sum up what positivism is, we had a French philosopher who started this or who brought in this idea into the research field, positivism. Positivism emphasizes on empirical evidence. It needs evidence to prove everything. It has to observe the laws, test and verify whatever research is being done. This was followed by a couple of other people like John Stuart Mill, Karl Popper. They all contributed to the positivist approach to the research. So what does it say? Positivism says knowledge should be based on observable phenomena. Anything that is taken for research should be observed, and there has to be evidences for it. And the evidences should be based out of experiences, the sensory experiences. Any evidence that is taken should be felt by the researcher, and there has to be experiments done on that. That is the foundation of knowledge. And any research which is a scientific inquiry must be objective, impartial, and there should be no bias. These are the important factors or important things that positivism says. The empirical observation is focused on measurable facts. Objectivity eliminate researcher bias. Quantitative analysis. So there has to be quantitative methods using of statistics and numbers to get an output. And generalizability, apply findings across context. This positivism follows deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is from a theory, from something that is known to unknown, a theory that is already existing, and then from the theory and hypothesis is taken, and from the hypothesis data is collected, experimented, sourced, and then a research output is given. And this positivism also says that the results can be repeated. So positivism emphasizes on rigorous, structured approach to research. So what is its goal? Its goal is to uncover universal truth that applies universally. This is what positivism says. Next, we will take an example of a positivist research. If we take the study topic as effect of caffeine on sleep, the hypothesis that could be formulated is more caffeine reduces sleep. Right. Now we said it has to follow quantitative methodologies. So there has to be a survey, and participants has to be survey has to be taken from the participants, the number of people who take coffee, and then the sleep hours, how many coffees they take per day, and then what the time duration, and then the coffee that they take before bed, how it affects the sleep hours. All this has to be taken as a survey. So this is a quantitative method. There has to be data collected, and then the analysis according to each of the or output given by each of the person. There has to be a statistical correlation and outcome. The outcome that is given, the research output that is given by the researcher, is generalizable and measurable conclusion, which means any researcher who does that can give a generalized output. An answer can be in general. It is not specific to one particular person. It is commonly applicable to the people who take caffeine. So any positivist research will give an output which is applicable to all, and the conclusion is measurable. So when we look at the characteristics of positivist research, the emphasis is on the empirical data. The data is a survey that we collect from the people, right? And then it also, then we formulate a hypothesis. Then we take some survey. After formulating hypothesis, we collect some data, we take a survey, and then we analyze it and give a outcome which is accepted universally. These are the characteristics of positivism, right? Then coming to the next thing, positivism in practice. Where is this applicable? It is applicable in these two fields. One is sociological research and one is psychology research. In psychology, positivist methods are used to measure behavior, cognitive performance, or physiological experiences. Because when we observe behavior or cognitive performance, there is a lot of quantitative research methods which has to be followed, and then we give a universal output which is general, which is applicable for most of the human beings or all the human beings. So anything, the output that is applicable and that is generalizable falls under the practice of positivism. This can be used in psychology and sociology, right? A researcher might investigate the relation between stress and academic performance. If I have to give you an example, if there is a researcher who is finding the relation between academic performance and stress, then he has to measure the cortisol level. What is the cortisol level? It is an indicator of stress, an hormone which indicates the stress level in human being. And then he has to take up the grades. He has to collect a survey, take a number of students, and then he will have to work with the cortisol level to find the stress levels. And then he will be able to give an output which is related to stress and academic performance. And that output is common, it is universal, it can be generalized. So then we have to remember these particular terms when it comes to positivism, like generalizability and then quantitative behavior analysis. All these are connected to positivism, which is a philosophy that is used in research. Next, moving on to sociological research. In case we use this positivism in sociology, right? Then how do we use it? A sociologist, what will a sociologist do? He will find out, for example, if we take a social media use and political engagement among teenagers, if we take that as an example, we'll have to take a survey, we'll have to do a statistical analysis, how social media impacts the idea of teenagers on politics, whether the teenagers accept everything that comes under social media forum and they change their mind, or they already have a idea about politics which keeps changing according to what all is delivered in the social media. So for this, we will have to take a survey, we will have to take a statistics, and then we come out with a result, whether the social media has an impact on the teenager or on people about politics, and what kind of impact, what is the level of impact, and that result can be generalized. It can be universal also. So these are the areas where we have positivism in practice when it comes to research. Right. Next, as I was trying to explain earlier, we have certain terms which is important when it comes to positivist research. The first term is independent variable, dependent variable, effect size, functional relationship, then we have hypothesis, we have internal validity, we have dualism, we have laws of nature. Let's look into each of it. First, let's start with the dependent variable. What is a dependent variable? The dependent variable refers to the outcome or the measure of interest in the research study. Dependent variable is the result, right? It is the variable that the researchers observe and measure to understand the effect of independent variable. So to easily understand dependent variable, it is the measured outcome, the result that the researcher gives is a dependent variable, right? And what is independent variable then? Independent variable is the manipulated factor. The researcher, when he does the research, he has to manipulate a couple of factors, and that falls under the category of independent variable. And what does he do? Right, during the research process, there will be something presumed by the researcher. This could be the cause, or this could be the reason for the effect. So that presumed research is an independent variable, right? So for example, if I have to give an example for an independent variable, an experiment to test the effect of study hours on exam scores. The independent variable would be the amount of study time. Okay, if I have to do an example on the effect of study hours on exam scores, if there is an increase in the study hours of exam, does it affect the scores? Does it have a proper effect on the score? or the data based on that. Whatever the data that I collect based on the study hours and the result falls under the category of independent variable. The study time, the independent variable is my study time, because this variable is manipulated or it's being observed. We observe the study time, the number of hours a student studies, and based on that, the outcome is given. So this study hours may vary, that is an independent variable. And what is a dependent variable? The dependent variable is the outcome, the result. In the same effect of study time, the exam score is the dependent variable. The amount of time or the hours of study is an independent variable, which is considered for research, and the output, the exam score, is my dependent variable. That is my result. Right. These are the first two key terms. I hope you understood that. The whichever the researcher takes a factor to research, and that factor can be manipulated. That is my independent variable. And the outcome, the researcher gives an outcome based on the factor, which is a measured outcome, because the scores are dependent on the number of hours that one studies, and it is a measured outcome. That is my dependent variable. Now, moving on to third one, effect size. Effect size is nothing but a statistic. It is a statistical metric that is used to do a research. The strength of impact or the statistical metric that we use. In clinical, for example, let's take something from medical sciences. Okay. Now, if there is a patient who's taken as a research factor, whatever medicine input that is given, the strength, the size of the medical treatment or the input of medicine that is given to the patient has its own effect on the cure, the curing of the illness. So that is measured as the effect size. The medicine impact or the whatever solution the doctor gives, the quantity, the statistical data that has to be taken of the patient, the number of visits, the number of medicines, or the variation in the medicine, all these forms the effect size. And then that gives a output. If you take an example of a patient. Now, if we go back to the same example of studying, the number of hours study, the concentration level of the student, all this forms the effect size of the research, which gives us an output. Now, the strength, if there is going to be a more concentration from the student's end, the result is going to be better. So that is the effect size. The components that affect the outcome is the effect size on the positivist research. Now, the next concept is functional relationship. Functional relationship is the relation between the duty or the work done and the output. We'll get back to the same example of studying. The more number of hours of concentrated study of a student is directly proportional to the result. The less number of hours and less concentration level gives a different result, and more number of hours, more concentration level gives a different result. So this is the functional relationship, which has got, it could be called as cause-effect link. The more an input is, the more there would be an output. So the researcher or somebody who does the research will definitely analyze the cause-effect relationship. That is functional relationship. Now we have next factor, which is internal validity. Internal validity is the cause and relationship. Right. Now, what is internal validity? Accuracy. Once a researcher starts to do a research, the accurate data that he collects gives an accurate research. The accuracy in data gives an accurate result, that is validity, right? It is a measure of how well design allows the researcher to draw conclusion. So how well a researcher gathers data, that gives a proper output. If there is improper collection of data, the output may also get distorted. So the gathering of information and data must be perfect and good. That gives a valid output. That is internal validity. Next, we have dualism. What is dualism? Separation of researcher and subject. Right. In positivist research, the principal emphasis objectivity is the objectivity of the researcher. Now, the researcher should not attach himself or herself to the research. He has to stand out separately from the topic of research, because the more he gets involved, a self involvement into the research can cause bias. If he thinks I was able to study, when we are looking at an example of analyzing study hours and the scores. So if a researcher thinks I was able to study, concentrate and study for half an hour, and then I was able to get a desired output, then he is attaching himself into the research, where he may not be able to arrive or derive a proper answer to his hypothesis, because it is a self analysis. Self analysis is biased, and self analysis is not applicable in research methodologies or research philosophies. What is applicable to the self may not be applicable universally. So, that is exactly why these positivist analysts or positivist philosophers say there has to be no bias. And this dualism is the same thing. It is emphasizing on the same thing. A researcher should separate himself from the research that he does and the subject. He has to find the key factors, and he has to find an answer which is applicable universally, moving himself away from the research. Next positive term is laws of nature. So laws of nature is something that already exists in nature. It's a fundamental principle that already exists in nature, that is universally accepted. Certain things are universally accepted. This has to be followed by the researchers. A human being, if he has to study, he cannot continuously study for 24 hours. So, if he studies continuously for 24 hours, the effect may be different. He may not be able to give a good output, because the universal law is he has to have a proper rest. That is a universal law which has to be taken into consideration by the researcher. He has to follow the laws of nature. And then empirical tested truth has to be followed by the researcher. Lack of sleep definitely leads to less concentration and less output. That truth has to be considered. So somebody does a positivist research will have to follow the laws of nature. And somebody who does a positive research will have to use these positive terms, positivist terms, that is independent variable, which is the factor that is analyzed by the researcher, and dependent variable, which is the outcome based on the factors, and effect size is the strength. That is the analysis. The analysis, the input, the input that is given, that has to be analyzed. That is the effect strength, and functional relationship is the cause effect link. The input that is given is directly related to the output, and validity is the accuracy of the research, and dualism is separating the self from the research motive, and he has to follow the laws which are universally tested has to be followed by the researcher. Now, this was the idea. Positivism was the first basic idea which was followed by the researcher since 19th century. And from 19th century, there was a shift. The shift is from positivism to post-positivism. There was a different thinking. The thinking is a question to the limitations of positivism. And the thinkers who were involved in this is Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn. They only started to analyze that human beings have some limitations and these limitations affect positivism. Post-positivism emerged in the later half of the 20th century, and certain scholars began to question. There are rigidity in positivism, and certain scholars began to question the rigidity and the questions which were risen, which were asked against positivism, is the root cause of another model, which is post-positivism. Karl Popper and Thomas Kuhn are the two names that we have to remember when it comes to post-positivism. What is post-positivism? It is just the opposite of positivism, right? Positivism is rigid. It follows certain principles and it follows certain orders. Now, post-positivism separates itself from this rigidity. It is flexible. It is flexible and it also takes into consideration the human limitation. And post-positivism also says that research can be revised. These are the important concepts or aspects of post-positivism, right? Now, one key event in the evolution of post-positivism was the crisis of the positivist paradigm. What is the crisis? The crisis is the universal law. Universal laws may or can be affecting the researcher. So that is the primary crisis. That is a primary crisis which led to the concept of post-positivism. Right. What are the key features of post-positivism? Post-positivism says reality exists, but reality cannot be completely known by all the researchers. And it also says knowledge is provisional and evolving. Okay, these are the two key differences. There in positivism, we saw everything has to be by the code or the laws of nature, and everything has to be completely known. Here it is just the opposite. Post positivism says reality exists, but nobody can know a complete reality. And there in positivism, they said knowledge is provisional. And if a knowledge is known, it has to be practiced the way that is known. But here they say knowledge is provisional and it keeps evolving. There would be a change in knowledge often. So people or the researcher who takes up to do research has to go with the evolution. There can be results and results can have changes. This is the primary concept of post-positivism. And it also suggests that everyone must accept that results can have modifications or changes since knowledge is evolving. And this type of research accepts that the result will have biased nature and it will have social context, it will have interpretation. And this type of research combines, it's a mixed method research. It combined quantitative and qualitative method. There in positivism, we saw it followed only quantitative methods wherein survey is taken, details are taken, and only those details are analyzed. Here it follows qualitative methods where it gives ideas to the feelings also is taken under consideration when it comes to post-positivism. And post-positivism also says it also accepts biased views because every research cannot go only with truth. There can be biases and that bias can has to be accepted. If For example, we were looking at one particular example in positivism, the studying, the factor, the number of hours that one studies, and the output. Now, this can have a bias. If it is considered for someone who's 21 years of age, then the study pattern, study hours, concentration level differs. That has to be taken into consideration. If the same research is done with a 3-year-old kid, there will be some bias. 3-year-old kid is still a kid, and the study hours vary, its concentration level varies. The rules that are applicable for a 21-year and the rules that are applicable for a 3-year-old has to differ. So there is definitely a bias. This is what post-positivism says, and this type of research accepts the bias. And the next thing is social context, the place, the area, studying the surrounding affects studies. That is a common known fact. So, someone who is given a proper surrounding to study and a proper methodology, all the necessities that affects the studies would give a better performance. Someone who is not given a proper tools to study may not be able to produce the desired result as the other person produces. So, this has to be taken into consideration when the research is being done. There is a social context and there is interpretation. One researcher may not look at the aspect as the other person does. No two man can look at the same thing in the same way. So there will be varied interpretations. All those interpretation, all those differences in the researcher's interpretation has to be understood. This is what post-positivism tells, and this is the inference. These are the inferences. So this philosophy says there is reality, but nobody can understand the complete reality. Knowledge is provisional, it changes and it keeps changing. A researcher must evolve according to knowledge, and research output can also change. And anybody who does research or the research should be will be influenced by definitely by many biases, by social context, by interpretation, and all those should be accepted. And post-positivism also follows mixed research methods, that is quantitative and qualitative, unlike earlier one where it follows only quantitative methodologies. Moving on to the differentiation. This is the differentiation that we talked about. Right. Feature, it's positivism, post-positivism, view of reality. When it looks at reality, positivism looks at reality which is fixed and is objective. Here it is objective but imperfectly knowable. It is not fixed. No knowledge is fixed. It can change. And the methods are quantitative. Here it is qualitative and quantitative. Researcher will have a detached researcher in positivism will be a detached observer. But in post-positivism, researcher can be a part of a process. He can also take part in the process. And here the knowledge is absolute truths. Positivism only states that everything that is done as a research should go with the absolute truth that is already existing, that is the universal law, which is already predefined and existing in the world. Whereas in post-positivism, it is tentative and it is revisable. Knowledge can be revised. Some known fact from earlier stages or earlier years can be revised, and it is nothing is permanent. Everything is tentative. Already a known fact which is given to the world can change, and the change has to be accepted. Validity, this is internal and external. This emphasizes on critical realism. So what is internal and external validity? This positivism, the research factors, the research components and the research output. The components are internal and the output is external. In positivist philosophy, we have only those components measured. The answer or the research output is based on those internal and external components, whereas in post-positivism, it emphasizes on critical realism, which means there are certain realistic factors which is taken into consideration so that there is no fixed internalism or external factor. There is nothing fixed internal factor or external factor in post positive theories. So example of post positive research, impact of teaching style on student motivation. Okay, now this says the topic is impact of teaching style on student motivation. So we have to take surveys and interviews. And then it recognizes role of teacher-student relationship, acknowledges cultural context, and findings are interpretive and open to discussion, right? Someone who does a research on student motivation has to take survey from student and also survey from interviews from the teachers who teach the student. And he has to identify what is the role, what is the impact of teacher on that particular student, and how is the relationship between that particular teacher and the student. And it also takes all the external factors that is available for both the student and the teacher. Based on all these factors, the research will be done, and the findings, whatever the research findings that the researcher gives, are always open for discussion. It is not closed ended, it is open ended. So that can be discussed and analyzed, and there can be further modifications to the research output also. This is a good example, right? Now, to conclude, positivism is a clear, structured, objective knowledge. Post positivism is nuanced, critical, context aware. Both are essential in research development. The choice depends on research goals, nature of problem, and theoretical orientation. Should one take positivism, the ideas of positivism or the ideas of post positivism depends on the research goal that he is trying to achieve, the nature of problem taken for consideration, and the theoretical orientation is all the ideas or all the factors he does research with. This is the conclusion for positivism and post-positivism. There are differences. Basically, if we understand this difference between positivism and post-positivism, we will be able to understand what it is. And there are questions. I have given just examples of questions. These are examples of how we might expect questions from in UGC-NET or SET or whatever, questions from positivism. Do we have questions? Yes, we do have questions. These are examples. These are not the real-time questions. These are examples curated just to understand how we might have questions. Post-positivism is related to which one of the following philosophies? Critical realism, empiricism, objectivism, or subjectivism. It is evident it always depends on critical realism because it acknowledges objective reality but recognizes that our understanding is influenced by context and interpretation. So, post positivist or the theorist or the researchers always view everything with the reality but go with the understanding, and the understanding is based on the context of the research and the interpretation of the researcher. Now, this is another question formulated. Which of the following are included in the positivist paradigm of research? Quantification, construction of hypothesis, use of objective measures. Yes, the first three would only fall under the positivist paradigm because subjective analysis, rejection of theories, they always follow the laws. So they won't reject any theories, and there is no place for subjectivity if you look at positivist, it is always objective reality. There is no place for subjectivity when it comes to positivist paradigm. And so the correct answer would be all the first three: quantification, construction of hypothesis, and use of objective measures. When it comes to positivist, it is objective only. The positivist paradigm emphasizes quantification, hypothesis construction, and the use of objective measures to observe and measure phenomena. So we have taken a list: positivism, hypothesis, reliability, and norm. So positivism, the correct match is epistemological position. Hypothesis is a tentative answer to a problem. Reliability is consistency of the score. Norm is average score. Positivism is an epistemological position. Hypothesis is a tentative answer to a research problem. This is exactly what I tried to explain. That's about it. So these are the common, simple, this is a kind of a simple philosophy that exists in research methodologies. Two philosophies that we have understood today, both are just the opposite. One began in 19th century, the other one began in the mid of 20th century. The second one, that is post-positivism, which was curated or created by some scholars, is just to question the positivist note. In simple terms, positivism believes truth can be known if we observe it carefully and measure it, right? Anything that relates to positivist theory has to be measurable and observable. A positivist researcher will study everything by counting the factors. Everything will be quantitative data only. Post-positivism, yes, observation is important. It says observation is important, but no one can be 100% sure about anything. This is the basic difference. The difference, the popular and basic difference is: first, positivism says everything which is called as truth has to be observed and measured. And post-positivism says, yes, science or anything is observation is important, measuring is important, but nobody can be 100% sure of anything. And the second part, post-positivism accepts that humans are biased and our observation may be limited. That's about for today's class. It's only the two basic philosophies that exist in the research models. That's about it. Thank you. Thank you all.